What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We just wrapped up week 5. Pretty exciting weekend of college football. We're going to get to my top 25 here. And if you're wondering, if you haven't watched the videos, we're just ranking these teams based off of what we have seen this season through the first 5 weeks. Based off of how the teams have performed against the level of competition that they have played. It doesn't necessarily, a loss is not necessarily a bad thing, especially this early in the season for me. If you've played one of the best teams in the country really close and you had a chance to win, that tells me that you're one of the best teams in the country, or you're at least not far behind that team. And the cupcake games, now that every team has pretty much played a couple of Power 5 games, I don't look at those games as much, as long as you were dominant, as long as you took care of business. So like Georgia's slow start, Michigan not looking overly impressive, but still completely controlling the games that they played. Things like that. I'm not penalizing teams as much for that. Maybe a little bit more for like a Missouri against Middle Tennessee, because Middle Tennessee hung around in that game late. But for the most part, we're really just trying to focus on these Power 5 opponents, or at least the better group of 5 teams that these teams have played. And speaking of Georgia, I'll go ahead and tell you right now, I don't have Georgia in the top 10. And I just don't understand the way, if we're ranking the teams, if these are the 2023 rankings, I don't understand why what Georgia has done in the past has anything to do with these rankings. It just shouldn't. The potential of Georgia should not have anything to do with these rankings. We're ranking the teams based off of what they have done this year. So I don't understand how Georgia is still number 1. And again, I don't even have them in my top 10. They have played, had to come from behind down double digits to 2 possessions to a mediocre South Carolina team at home, and then this week had to come from behind against a pretty bad, honestly, Auburn team. Now that game was on the road; it was a rivalry, so I don't think that's too big of a deal. But other teams have been more impressive so far. That doesn't mean that I don't think Georgia's going to have a great season. I still think they're going to win all their games and get to the college football playoff and get to the national championship. But right now, I can't rank them that high if I'm being fair to these teams. And so, yeah, that's just one thing I don't get. So let's jump into it here. 21 through 25. So a perfect example of a loss is not necessarily hurting you, in my opinion, because we're just evaluating these teams based off of what we've seen. Clemson and LSU, both of those teams have 2 losses, but I've still got them ranked. Look, Clemson went to overtime against one of the best teams in the country in Florida State. They had a chance against Duke. The score, if you watch that game, the score does not indicate how close it was. Clemson had a chance. A couple of turnovers there in that one on the road, first game of the season. It could have very easily won that game. And now they've got a win. So they've got a win on the resume over a Syracuse team that was undefeated, a team that I don't think is going to be a great team, probably not even a top 25 team at the end of the season, but we know they're pretty good. They're not bad. And then for LSU, you look at the Florida State game. Again, lost to one of the best teams in the country. Really, I thought looked like the better team in the first half. And then against Ole Miss, had a chance in that game on the road. Very close loss. They completely dominated against Mississippi State, an SEC opponent. And so I've got LSU still hanging on here at number 25, but just barely. And if a team like Louisville or Maryland was to be really impressive this week, I would probably put them ahead of LSU or maybe even Clemson. Speaking of Maryland and Louisville, yes, I know I don't have them ranked. I know they're both undefeated. I'm keeping my eye on both teams. They don't even have to necessarily win this weekend. If Maryland just plays Ohio State really tough, Louisville plays Notre Dame really tough, you're probably actually going to see them ranked next week. So it's not even about winning. It's just about their performance against a high caliber team. And we just have not seen those teams play against quality competition. So I can't rank them yet, but we'll see how they play this week. Again, not saying they have to win, but see how they play against one of the better teams in the country. And that could potentially get Louisville or Maryland, or both of them, potentially ranked. Kansas State, number 23. On the road, lost to a last second field goal to Missouri. That tells me that Kansas State and Missouri are very even. That's why I've got Missouri just one spot ahead of them. Head-to-head does matter, obviously, and I do very much believe in head-to-head. So Missouri over Kansas State there, but barely. Both teams have looked pretty good, but I still want to see more from them. Utah, number 21. Tough loss here to Oregon State. But they've still got to win over Florida. They've still got to win over UCLA. And another thing that I mentioned the word resume last week. I talked about resume, and just because I used that word, everyone wanted to pick apart my rankings and say, this team has a better resume than this team. How do you have them? Well, I said that resume starts to have a little impact in my rankings. It's not all about resume, it's about performance. But if teams are really close, that's when I go to resume. Missouri and Kansas State, to me, very close. Resume, head-to-head, goes to Missouri. So Utah, really performance-wise, because their offense is so bad, I don't know that they're a top 25 team without Cam Rising, but they have done some things. If you look at the resume, they beat Florida and they beat UCLA. So their resume is the only reason why I have them ranked, just because the offense is so bad. It kind of reminds me of Iowa. The defense really, really good, but the offense continues to struggle, and it's really just because they don't have Cam Rising. And that's another thing. Where do you rank them? Because I assume he's going to be back. It's kind of tough to figure out what to do with Utah here, but I've got them at 21, and then we go to 16 through 20. Ole Miss at number 20, huge win over LSU. So we know that Ole Miss and LSU are pretty similar. That's why I've got them ranked pretty close to each other, and it feels like Ole Miss is a good bit behind Alabama, so that's why I have them still down at number 20. Kentucky at 5-0. Really, the Florida win was fantastic. They looked great this weekend. Looked like a top 10 team, but then you have to also look at Vanderbilt. Not an overly impressive performance there. You look at their games against the cupcake opponents that they played, and yes, they won pretty easily, but they didn't completely dominate those games. So I'm still kind of waiting on Kentucky. Let's see what they do against Georgia this weekend. Texas A&M number 18, very impressive win against Arkansas. This team, honestly, I feel like they might be better than number 18, but based off of what we've seen so far this season, just need that really good win. Again, they need to beat a quality team for me to know that they're a really good team, because Miami is another team that I just don't know about yet. Their win over Texas A&M is great, but these are two teams that we're going to find out. We're going to find out about both of them very soon. Oregon State looked really good. At home, this team's going to be tough to beat this year. Impressive win over Utah. Their defense playing great. And so they're number 17 for me. Let's move on to the top 15. And again, Miami didn't play this weekend, and I'm still kind of waiting to, I really, my gut feeling is that Miami and Texas A&M are both top 10 teams. I really think that. But I don't know that I can say that based off of the performances just yet. And so trying to just base this off of what we've seen this year, and we're still kind of waiting on some of these teams. 11 through 15. So there's Georgia at number 11. But we'll start at the bottom. Duke at number 15. Played Notre Dame really, really tough. I'm not really going to penalize them for that game. I mean, they had a chance to win it. The fact that it wasn't home does hurt just a little bit. If they had gone on the road and gotten that close, I might have them a little bit higher. North Carolina didn't play this week. They're number 14. They're undefeated. And you could argue that North Carolina they beat South Carolina easier than Georgia did. So that helps them out. And then you've got Tennessee. Tennessee's not ranked, but they beat South Carolina easier than Georgia did. And again, it all comes back to Georgia here, but I didn't rank Tennessee just because of their loss to Florida. Florida not ranked. They're right there on the edge. But anyways, North Carolina, they can't really jump them up much higher. Same thing with Oklahoma until they play better competition. They've at least got some impressive wins over Power 5 teams, so they've got something there. But before I can jump those teams in the top 10, I have to see them play against really good teams. And we're going to see that Oklahoma plays Texas this weekend. That's going to be a big one. USC at number 12. Almost let Colorado come back in that game. And just watching that game, watching Colorado-Oregon, tells me that there's a gap between Oregon and USC. That's why I've got USC down at number 12. And again, there is Georgia. I know I've talked a lot about them in this video. It just all comes back to what they've done this year. South Carolina, again, down multiple possessions at halftime at home against a mediocre South Carolina team. Had to come from behind against a pretty bad Auburn team. I said that before. There's just really nothing there that tells me that Georgia is an elite team this year so far. Now, again, I think they're going to be. This is still a team that I'm going to as of right now, I still have them winning the SEC. I don't think anyone's going to knock them off. Kentucky's going to be a really good challenge for them on Saturday, but based off of what we've seen, Georgia does not look like a top 10 team, and I've got them at number 11. I think all of the top 10 teams in my rankings have looked more impressive than Georgia. So there is number 10, Alabama. And I'm not going to penalize teams for playing tough schedules. Alabama lost to Texas. Well, Texas is really good, and they have proven that. they have a win over Ole Miss where they pretty much dominated. So Alabama is looking like a really good team. And I feel like I've been the voice of reason with Alabama since the offseason. You had one group saying Alabama was going to be terrible. They were going to lose 4 or 5 games. Then the other group saying they're out for revenge. They're going to run the table, go undefeated. I was kind of in the middle. I had them at 10-2. I said this team's going to be good, but I don't think they're going to be national championship good. And then we see them lose to Texas, and everyone, and the South Florida game, everyone's talking about this team's going to be terrible. And I had to come back and say, look, no, they're still going to be good. Just it's going to be okay once they get Milroe back in there. I picked them to beat Ole Miss by multiple scores. They did. And now I think everyone's kind of jumping back on Alabama, expecting them to maybe be that team in the SEC. I would hold off on that because I think Texas A&M on Saturday is going to really, really be a challenge for them. But we'll talk about that game more later. Washington State at number 9. So the Oregon State win now looks even better after Oregon State just beat Utah. So Washington State, and that's another thing is as you learn more about the opponents of all these teams, I was going into this week thinking Oregon State really was not very good. Maybe they were overrated, but I think they proved me wrong, and that is the reason why Washington State's up to number 9. Washington at number 8, a little bit of a struggle against Arizona, and the fact is they really have not played any quality teams yet, and so that's why they've dropped for me. Just don't have a good measuring stick on them against any of the better teams. Oregon at number 7, they're 5-0. The win over Colorado, very, very impressive. But, you got to go back to the Texas Tech game. Texas Tech does not look very good. And Oregon, they struggled a little bit in that game. So I don't have them in the top 5. And I've actually got Notre Dame ahead of them. And I know people will think it's crazy because you've got a one-loss team over an undefeated team here in this situation. But give Notre Dame some credit for what they have done. They were one play away from beating a top 5 Ohio State team. Then they go on the road and they beat a good Duke team. Also, dominate against NC State, an NC State team that's not bad. They're a mediocre Power 5 team, but still we're impressed with Notre Dame in that game. So the Ohio State game was very, very close. That tells me that Notre Dame and Ohio State are very, very close. I don't think there should be a big gap in those teams in the rankings. So I've got the Irish at number 6. Again, I'm not going to penalize them for playing a tough schedule. Ohio State, NC State, and Duke. They played 3 pretty good teams. If their schedule was a little different, let's say they had not played Ohio State, where would they be ranked? They'd probably be ranked in the top 5. So, yeah, Notre Dame at number 6 for me. And then we go to the top 5. Florida State at 5, Ohio State at 4, Michigan 3, Penn State 2, Texas number 1. So Florida State, a couple things hurting them, I think just a little bit. LSU's inconsistency, that win does not look as good now. And then the fact that they had to, go to overtime to beat Clemson, although that was on the road. And again, I've got Clemson in the top 25. But you got the Boston College game where they struggled a little bit. So there are some things that make me question Florida State being ranked too high. But still, I give them credit for beating LSU, for going on the road and beating Clemson. I've got them number 5. Ohio State at number 4. They're 4-0, and the win over Notre Dame is huge. They've only 4 games for them, and the other games were against Indiana and a couple of Group of 5 teams. So I don't think Ohio State's been quite as impressive as the top 3 teams. And that's really, these 3 teams at the top were the top 3 teams for me. So Texas, Penn State, and Michigan. And, you look at Michigan and what they did against Rutgers and Nebraska. Rutgers and Nebraska are not, I wouldn't say they're much worse than South Carolina and Auburn, 2 teams that Georgia's played. Michigan was completely dominant in those games. Georgia struggled in those games, and that's the difference right now for me with Michigan and Georgia. But with Texas, Penn State, and Michigan, all 3 teams, I think those are the 3 teams that are fighting for that number 1 spot, at least in my opinion. And so this is where resume came into play, kind of the tiebreaker between those 3 teams. Penn State struggled a little bit against Northwestern, but if you look at the second half, they wound up pulling away, dominating. And so, it wasn't a great performance start to finish, but they've done enough. Their other wins have been very impressive. Completely blowing out Iowa. You look at their win over West Virginia. West Virginia all of a sudden is a pretty good football team, and so that's a good win. So their resume is better than Michigan's. That's why they're at 2, but Texas has the best resume. I mean, you look at the win over Alabama, on the road, by the way, and now a win over Kansas, where they pulled away and won pretty easily. Kansas is a good football team. You look at what they did to Baylor, completely dominating that game. So Texas, to me, is definitely the team looking like the best in the country. They're going to have a test, though, coming up against Oklahoma. That will be a very, very good game, a huge game coming up. A revenge game for Oklahoma. Wouldn't be shocked if they pulled off the upset. But that's how I'm ranking the teams right now based off of what we've seen so far. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of anger from some fans, especially Georgia fans. But if you're a Georgia fan, can you honestly say that Georgia has looked more impressive than these top 10 teams? I don't think they have. I think they're going to, and I think the potential is there, and I think Georgia winds up in the top 5. But right now, can't put them there. Give me your thoughts. Give me your rankings down in the comments below.